I'm literally sitting on a pillow right now because I'm too damn short for the frame. Hello, welcome back to my channel. So, if you know anything about my reading habits, you know that I read a lot of very short books. I have some kind of problem with big books for some reason. They're intimidating. It's really hard to get into them just knowing that I'm going to have to devote so much time to a book. They're just scary. So in order to enable myself and also you, if you're like me, I want to recommend a bunch of short books that I think are really great, totally worth the read, and are very digestible and succinct and easy to finish quickly, because that is my vibes. I do want to put it out there that my definition of short book is like 250 pages and under, ideally 200 pages and under, but a couple of these books are, closer to 250 pages. So without further ado, let's get into recommending some short books. One of the biggest short book genres that I have had experience with is essay collections. I find that most essay collections are very short and also just easy to read for the most part. But one of my favorite kind of subgenres of the essay collection is the single essay collection, by which I mean a single essay makes up the entire book, or an essay on one particular topic. And there's two books that I have as an example of this. The first one is We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This was actually a TED Talk that she gave, and she ended up making it into a very tiny little book. So this book is only 52 pages long, and it basically covers Adichie's experience with feminism and her thoughts on feminism. Because it is so short, there's not a lot of extra time for kind of tangents or anything like that. It's just very basic and the core principles that she thinks are important in feminism, and one of those being how we teach our children. And that's a big focus of this little book, is how we raise our children, both girls and boys, to kind of fit into this system that we have in place for ourselves between femininity and masculinity, and what it means to be a man or a woman. It was a really fun read, and it also really helped me understand some of the basic concepts of feminism without flowery language or difficult principles to understand. So I would highly recommend this if you're interested in feminism. The other single essay collection that I was thinking of is Bluets by Maggie Nelson. And oh my God, when I read this book, I was completely overwhelmed with how beautiful it is and how she deals with all of the topics in this book. So basically, this is a single essay relating to the color blue, and it is broken into over 200 little mini paragraph sections, and it deals with what blue makes Maggie Nelson think about, all of the different associations with blue. So it goes into the historical connotations of blue, the societal connotations, and also the emotional connotations. Why is blue always associated with grief? What does that mean? So she talks about relationships a lot. She talks about grief. She talks about the self, identity, and all of it weaves back to the color blue. And I was just blown away by this book. It is so stunning. Her language is so beautiful. There are a lot of parts that are definitely more dense, but it was still a very quick read. I ended up reading this for a class. I was taking a essay writing class, and this was a really great resource for that, but it was also just a really beautiful read, and it's less than 100 pages. If those concepts sound interesting to you, I think this would be a really great read for you. I loved it so much. It's actually one of my favorite books of all time now, but beautiful language, really interesting concept. So moving on to another category of short books, and that is poetry, because most poetry collections are very short, so it's easy to get through them. And I have two recommendations for poetry, the first of which is Felicity by Mary Oliver. So I love Mary Oliver. I would say that she's my favorite poet. And she writes mostly about nature, which is an aspect of poetry that I can always relate to. Nature is kind of a universal topic, and I think it's really interesting to read poetry about nature. So this is a more recent collection of hers. She wrote it just a few years before she passed away, and it is really beautiful and very short, and a lot of the poems take up, just a little bit of the page, as you can see. So it was very quick to get through and just really beautiful. So the other poetry collection that I would recommend is kind of a poetry anthology, and it is There Are Girls Like Lions by various authors. The cover is beautiful. It's just a really beautiful book in general, and there's really gorgeous illustrations throughout. So there's a lot of different poets featured in this book, and they all just talk about what their experience is being a woman. So there's kind of older poets in here, more classic poets, and then there's newer ones. And this is actually where I discovered Margaret Atwood's poetry, because there's a poem in here by her. So it is kind of a more feminist take on poetry. So if you were interested in that kind of style of poetry, I would definitely recommend this. But it is also just a short, really beautiful collection of poetry. So I would highly recommend this. Say you're really into memoirs. What would I recommend as a short memoir? Because a lot of memoirs can be pretty chunky. Autobiographies and biographies of different people are usually big books. So in terms of a memoir, I have Sex Object by Jessica Valenti. So Jessica Valenti is a very well-known feminist icon in our kind of day and age. She's wrote a lot of different feminist texts, and this is just her memoir, and talking specifically about her experience being sexualized as a woman throughout her life, the kind of small things that have happened to her and the big things that have happened to her, and how that all kind of weaves together to make her life story. So it is really interesting. I will put it out there that there are a couple of things in here that are really intense. Not only is this under 200 pages, but it is just a really interesting look at Jessica Valenti's life, and it is kind of universal for the female experience. If you are a woman, you'd kind of know what she's talking about in a lot of instances, even if you haven't had the exact experience she's talking about. I wouldn't say that this book is fun, but it is informative and relatable in a lot of ways, and I think it's an important read, so highly recommend. Another category of short books is plays. So most plays that I know of are very short and for the most part go really quickly. So this might be harder to get through just because of the language, but I would recommend Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. So this is just a very fun, lighthearted play. Obviously the language is Old English, so you have to be ready for that and trying to decode what's being said. But a lot of the lines are just really funny, and it's just a fun comedy romance type of play. So this is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, and I think that it's one of the more accessible and easier to get into plays. I would not go for one of the tragedies or the histories if you're just getting into Shakespeare or looking for a kind of a short read, but instead go for a comedy, and this is just very romantic and cute and fun, so I would highly recommend it if you're looking for short books. If you're someone who's interested in graphic novels, I do have a recommendation for a short graphic novel for you, and that is Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, illustrated by Miles Hyman, who is actually Shirley Jackson's grandson, which is just so cool. So this is a very short graphic novel, which basically takes almost word for word the story The Lottery by Shirley Jackson and makes it into graphic novel form. And the art is very interesting. It's not like a typical kind of cutesy graphic novel style that you would expect, but it fits really well with the story, and it's definitely sinister and just very interesting. Like, I really love the composition of a lot of these pages. And it just takes a classic story that is kind of very important in canonical literature at this point and just makes it into a more accessible read. If you're interested in a graphic novel and also maybe interested in somewhat classic literature, I would recommend this one. It's really great. This next one is actually middle grade, I think, but it's a weird story of how I came across it. So I was just in Barnes & Noble a while ago looking at the regular adult fiction section, and I came across Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate, and it kind of looks middle grade-esque, especially because there's like illustrations throughout, and it definitely looks young, but it was shelved in the adult fiction section, so I was like, okay, I guess it's adult fiction. I read it, and then I looked it up on Goodreads, and it says that it's middle grade. So I don't know what happened there. Either way, it's a really, really great book. So this book is actually told from the perspective of a tree, and it's talking about all the animals that live there. And all of a sudden, we get this human immigrant character that the tree is looking at and seeing how that girl is being treated by everyone in the neighborhood, because the neighborhood is a very like stereotypical white American neighborhood. So it's a commentary on, you know, how people treat other people, but told from an outside perspective. And that was such an interesting perspective to get, because it really puts you out of the situation and it makes you examine the situation in a way that you've never looked at before. When I read it, I really could tell that the language was middle grade, but if you're looking for middle grade or just a very sweet story told from a unique perspective, I would recommend this book. It is about 215 pages, so very short, and the font is pretty big, and there are illustrations on a lot of the pages. So it is a very fast read. I read it in like a couple of hours. So I would highly recommend this one as well. Let's move on to some general fiction short books. This is probably the category that I read the most of out of all of the categories. Let's start with something a little bit sinister and creepy if you're into kind of the horror genre. And that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This cover is just really great. But this book follows our two main characters, our narrator and her sister, who live in this giant castle after their parents die. And it's very creepy, and you can't tell what's real and what's not. And Mary Catherine, our main character, is just really strange. I don't want to tell you too much plot because it is such a strange book that it's really hard to explain. And also I feel like you need to go into it without knowing exactly what the plot is. But I will just tell you that this is a very sinister, creepy, weird read. I would highly recommend this if you're into that kind of genre. And I just love Shirley Jackson, so I had to shout her out yet again. This one is kind of a wild card. It doesn't super fit into any category, I guess, but this is Hysteria by Jessica Gross. I don't actually know what the category of this book would be. It's a very strange book. So basically, this young woman has some problems with drinking and is also really obsessed with sex in an unhealthy way. And so one day at her favorite bar, she thinks that she sees Sigmund Freud, and it's so bizarre. I can't even explain to you how bizarre this was. It really felt like a fever dream when I read it. I read it in like one sitting. It's really out there. It's really weird, but I would highly recommend it if you're into kind of weird books and unreliable / unlikable main character stories, because it does really get inside this character's head. It really delves into her past traumas and relationship with her father, which is kind of a big component of why she is the way she is in present. If you like that kind of thing, I would highly recommend this, because my God, as soon as I finished it, I gave it a 5-star. I could not even compute what happened, but immediately it was a 5-star. So here's a wild card. If you're into it, read it. So say you're really into translated fiction and you really like beautiful language that is very flowery and really makes you think about what's being said. And for that, I would recommend Die My Love by Ariana Harwicks. My goodness, was this a beautiful read. So I would recommend this more for the language rather than the plot, because plot-wise, not a ton happens. It's just following a woman who's kind of slowly descending into madness. Like, it took me longer than I anticipated to read this because I just wanted to soak in every word and every metaphor and everything that was being said. It is only 123 pages. Like I said, I would really recommend this if you're into translated literature or if you're just really looking for a very beautifully written book. And then finally, let's end on a really fun note. This is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is also a translated fiction book. It was translated from Japanese. And it is about this quaint little cafe where if you sit in a certain seat in the cafe, you can time travel. And there's a lot of rules, but the main rule is that you have to drink all of your coffee before it gets cold. Otherwise, you won't be able to return to the present. So it follows kind of 4 different main characters, and the stories are all woven together, like you see all of the characters kind of together in the cafe, but each section follows one of the characters as they travel to the past for whatever their reasons are. And my God, did I cry at this book? I will say that it is very emotional at times, but it is such a fun concept and such a fun read to see all of kind of the inner workings of the magic system, or whatever you want to call it. So if you're looking for kind of a magical realism-ish book, I would highly recommend this, and it was very sweet and fun and very short, so easy to get through as well. Those are all the short books that I have to recommend to you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you read any of these books, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. I love all of these books, and I think that you will too. If you like this video and want to see similar videos in the future, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.